Welcome to the Archetypal Mosaic. This is Mikhail Tank. Today's episode is about the Kabbalah, the sacred Kabbalah, with Rabbi Fisdel. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Rabbi Fisdel can be found on two websites, classicalkabbalist.org and mysticaljudaism.org. He has two books out on Amazon. One is about the Kabbalah, one is about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he offers spiritual counseling. I've taken a Kabbalah class from you recently about the holy, holiness in general. If you can describe, in this world, there's so much that's dense, and maybe it doesn't reach into the holy sphere. Whether somebody is atheist or not, I think there's definitely a feeling of divinity when you can elevate society, yourself, with whether intelligence or music or spirituality or inspiration, creativity. What makes something holy?
I would say what makes something holy is reverence. And also one's intentionality. The whole concept of holiness, at least in Jewish thinking, is the concept of separating levels of consciousness. So we're usually involved with what I refer to as daily consciousness or mundane consciousness, or if you want to be more primitive about it, survival consciousness. And that's normal because we're here in physical form and we have to navigate with physical life and its challenges. On the other hand, the focus on the material level is only one direction or one cognitive level of consciousness, whereas the holy separates from the mundane and opens the doors to higher levels of consciousness.
In a way, for example, Native Americans, they revered nature and certain stones and things. Now, this is, in a way, very similar to the Jewish concepts, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah. The Jewish concept is we have to revere life. That life is primary, and that there are sacred dimensions to everyday life, and there's sacred dimensions beyond it.
All right. Now let's talk about your beginning with the Kabbalah.
Okay.
What made you? First of all, if you can define the term Kabbalah.
Oh, okay. Kabbalah, well, basically means two things, and in both of them relate to the whole general understanding of Kabbalah. One is Kabbalah comes from the verb lekabel, to receive something. So Kabbalah is used in two regards in terms of receiving. One is receiving information, insight, connection from higher levels. So if one elevates consciousness and connects with the flow of energy from the higher levels, that you are receiving in a very direct sense. So Kabbalah also refers to receiving in the sense of tradition. So that Kabbalah actually has two sides to it: an experiential side, and also a theoretic side, which is designed to try and explain what comes to one through the process of altering and elevating one's consciousness.
So how did you begin with the interest in this?
Oh, well, it started a long time ago. I was a kid. Well, more or less. I think the major door that opened was when I was either 17 or 18, and I found the only novel that Martin Buber ever wrote, called "For the Sake of Heaven," and it was about it was it was about a Hasidic family, and also the main character in the story was studying Kabbalah and would also experience, as a result, different states of consciousness and that sort of thing. It was an intriguing novel, and it caught my attention, interest in Kabbalah. So that was when I was about 17. So when I turned 18, I started tracking down what I could find on the Kabbalah that would be, informative or interesting to me. So that's when I got connected with some of the writings of Gershom Scholem. And it just sort of one thing led to the other. That then when I was 18, I left for Jerusalem. I studied at the Hebrew University for about 6 years. While I was there, I studied Kabbalah at the university, which was, the theoretic end, the texts, and the traditions. But I also studied with a elderly Yemenite gentleman who was actually a practicing Kabbalist. So I developed an interest in this in my late teens and early 20s.
And how did you become a rabbi?
Oh, that's an even more convoluted story. I had wanted to be a rabbi from the time I was about 5 years old, and my family lived in one of the suburbs outside of Chicago, and there was only a Reform synagogue there. Actually, there's more than one, but there was no real, conservative Orthodox synagogues. So my upbringing was there in the Reform movement. So when I graduated high school, I went to the Hebrew Union College for a year to start studying for my undergraduate degree and also toward the rabbinate. But being there a year, I realized this was not a good fit. That I was looking for an approach to Judaism that was more traditional and that was more broad-based and in-depth. So I really concluded after about a year that I couldn't find it here. So it dawned on me the best bet would be to pick up and move to Israel and get an education there. So I gave up the idea of the rabbinate and went into Jewish studies, and I got a BA in Jewish history and also world history. Then I came back to the United States and studied at the Spertus College of Judaica and got an MA in Jewish studies. So I was in Jewish education for 13, 14 years. And then I got out of that and then moved to California. Shortly, or about a year or two after I got to California, I reconnected with Zalman Schachter, who's the founder of the Jewish Renewal Movement. I had actually met him the year I was in Cincinnati at the HUC. So it had been like 20, 25 years since I had seen him. But in the interim, he was giving a seminar at Mount Madonna, for, I think it was for Shavuot. And I reconnected with him there, and then we got to talking, and he mentioned that he had started a rabbinic program. So I decided, this would be a good way to get back to what I originally wanted to do in the first place. So I studied with Zalman for several years, and I was ordained by him. So I became a rabbi after doing this rather circuitous route.
Amazing. Very cool. So you found your way.
Eventually.
Now, a lot of people go to Israel to go to the Wailing Wall. And what was your experience when you went to the wall? How did you feel? Did you feel that spark of divinity? Were you bothered by what surrounds the wall? And what is the history of what's left of the wall? Who built it?
Oh, well, where would you like me to start?
Anywhere.
Okay. The wall originally was the wall surrounding the mount. It wasn't part of the temple itself, because the temple had a courtyard, and then there were several layers of the temple. But the mountain itself was surrounded by, I guess you'd call it a defensive wall, or a wall marking out that this was sacred territory. The western wall was the only wall that survived. My personal sense is, for a number of different reasons, that how do I put it? I regard what we can call the Temple Mount as sacred ground, and I've had very, very profound experiences both at the wall and on the mound itself. Although, parenthetically, I'm not 100% sure that's exactly where the temple was. There's a possibility to my mind the temple was a little further over, so to speak, that the Ophel that goes out into the valley from the mound area is surrounded by a valley, and it gradually goes up. And I've always had the feeling that the temple was likely to be, at the apex of where the valley rises, which is not exactly the same place. So, what came to me in meditation years ago was that reinforced the concept that the temple wasn't exactly where we think it was, is because the ancient source of water for Jerusalem was the Gihon Springs, which are out a little on the Ophel, and that the probability is more likely that the temple would have been directly over the well, not a half a mile away. Because the water was extremely important not only for the residents in Jerusalem, it was very important for temple services. So it makes more sense that the water channel would have been right over under the temple instead of, some distance where they would have to find artificial ways to move the water.
How likely is it? I also, for some reason, whenever I see the temple built by Solomon, yes?
Yeah. Well, the first one was.
Whenever I see that in my mind, I always see it on an uphill as well.
Yeah.
Tell me, now I have a book out called The Testament of King Solomon, which deals with all the genes or the genies or the demons that helped Solomon build the temple. How likely is it that he used the magic ring and had that help, or how do you think he actually had the temple built?
Well, I sort of take the biblical account seriously. What you're describing is midrash, but one of the things that appears to have been is Solomon invoked the help of King Hiram of Tyre in Phoenicia, that there were very close ties between them. And Hiram said, well, if you're going to build a temple, I can send you the best architect that we have, in Phoenicia, who happens to be Jewish, by the way, and he'll help you construct the temple. And the Phoenicians sent a lot of supplies, timber and things like that, as well as the architect, the material to build the temple. The plans for building the temple, the blueprint, was God provided to King David, that which must have come in an altered state of consciousness. But that's the format, the blueprint that Solomon used to build the temple. What the transmission that David received, that David passed on to Solomon.
Now this trend there's a couple of things to follow up with the transmission. So, for example, in Delphi, where the oracles were getting transmissions, they were using gases from the earth to help them get into an altered state.
Yeah.
What helped David get this transmission?
The Ark of the Covenant.
Okay, we're going to definitely discuss that a little bit later on with the cherubs and all of that incredible stuff. That's going to be a little bit later on. So let's go back to the temple. So where do you think the concept of the demons came in the Midrash?
To be honest with you, I have no idea.
How many years after the writing of the Old Testament was the Midrash written?
Well, the Midrash covers sort of like traditions, stories, fables, to a certain extent, even like drashas.
Could the Phoenicians be the demons, in a way, if they were sent as the helpers? Because they were idol worshippers, is that correct?
Yeah.
Could that be?
That could have been. Yeah, that could have been part. That could have. Yeah, that's conceivable.
Okay, so then let me ask you this. So there's this interesting thing about God having 72 names.
Yeah.
There's also a upside down version of this where in the certain Islamic beliefs there's the concept of meeting 72 virgins in heaven, correct? Mm-hmm. This number of 72 names of God, 72 virgins, are those things related as well, the names to the virgins, and why 72?
No. Well, I don't know what the relationship would be. I could tell you about the 72-letter name if you'd like.
Please.
The 72-letter name is based on it's a mystic concept. It's based on 3 verses in Exodus that are right after each other. They're sequential. When Moses is standing about ready to split the Red Sea, or ask God to split the Red Sea, what the early Jewish mystics noted is that we're talking about 3 verses that are talking about the direct intervention of God, plus each of the 3 verses has exactly 72 letters. So there's 3 verses, one right after the other, about the splitting of the Red Sea that are 72 letters. So the concept developed that the letters themselves produce a specific manifestation of the power of God. So the way the 72-letter name was constructed is based on taking the first verse and you string it out. You have 72 letters. Then under it you put the second verse, but you write it backwards. You string the letters in the reverse direction, and then you go forward again with the third verse. So it creates an undulating motion, up and back and up. And it's 72 letters, which is from a numerologic standpoint is a good number because it's 9. 7 and 2 are 9, and 9 is the number of bringing things into completion or into actuality. So the concept of the 72-letter name was that you create 72 triads of letters. So if you take the first letter of each verse and put it together, you have 3 of them. Then you do it with the second letter of each 3 verses, and so on. You have 72 triads. And the triads can be utilized from 2 standpoints. One standpoint is it can be utilized as the 72-letter name per se, or 72 names within the 72-letter name. And each of them are understood to be a different aspect of God's activity or creative force.
Then who do you think, there's also writings in the magical texts talking about 72 demons. What is it about this strange thing where, do you think some people have inverted God's names into demonic names? Or is there a way?
Probably somebody has. In Kabbalah, the use of magic in general, and black magic in particular, is absolutely forbidden. The Kabbalists are very clear in general, and One of the great Kabbalists, Joseph G. Katia, in the beginning of his book, Gates of Light, in his introduction, he goes into this whole thing about, I'm going to write about the different names of God, and the relationship between the names and the Sephirot and the Tree of Life, and the relationship, of what the names mean on different levels. He said, but this is only to be used for worship or for meditation or for moving closer to God or for enhancing the mitzvot, doing the commandments. That if you attempt to do, I forgot exactly the way he put it, but it was sort of biblical.
Selfish intention,
or you're doing this for any other reason, for power, for money, for self-interest. That's the road to self-destruction.
Now, let's see. The next thing would be Abraham. Recently I went to kind of investigate an interesting religion whose belief system it is that Abraham was God. So he was God, like just as supposedly Jesus was man who was also God. So Abraham was also the same thing. And I said, I don't think so. This was a man, a son of God.
Yeah.
What is your interpretation of Abraham as God on earth?
My belief isn't any different than the general Jewish belief, and that is that's not possible.
Mm-hmm. Good to clear up.
Yeah, the whole concept of Son of Man or Son of God, in biblical literature and in subsequent Jewish thinking, has always been a term that was either applied to humanity in general, that we're all children of God and they were all made in God's image, or from the time of late antiquity and the Middle Ages, the term was sometimes used in both terms, the Son of Man and the Son of God, was used in terms of the Messiah. But nowhere in Jewish thought is the Messiah ever considered to be God.
Well said, yeah. It's strictly a man.
Yeah, it's a job. Actually, that the Messiah has specific functions that he's supposed to fulfill, at the point where God sends the Messiah to do it.
Now, in the Old Testament, it says that the Messiah, a Messiah, will come and raise the dead to become living and the earth, right?
No. There is a belief in rabbinic thought that when at the end of time, those who are the dead will be physically the ones that are worthy, have lived good lives, would be resurrected and brought back to life
by the Messiah.
Well, it's not clear in rabbinic thought. The concept is during the Messianic period or the end of days, that would be one of the signs. But it doesn't necessarily say that the Messiah is raising the dead, but rather the dead will come back to life, which is more God's job than that's beyond the power of the Messiah to resurrect anybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, if we go back to Abraham, aside from being a son of God and just a man,
yeah,
perhaps the first man. No, Adam was the first man.
Yeah.
So Abraham was the one responsible, supposedly, for the Sefer Yetzirah.
Yeah, but the point there, though, is you have to understand how things worked in the Middle Ages.
Okay.
That there are a lot of indications in the Sefer Yetzirah that it's a very old text. That it could have been written anywhere between late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. But the versions so what in medieval period, people would write books that were very holy, that had very powerful content, and basically the concept or the practice was you attributed a book like that to somebody in the far past who's respected. It was a medieval way of saying this is a very holy book. This goes way back. We have no idea who wrote it, so we're going to attribute it to Abraham.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's how it worked.
The Sefer Yetzirah is known as a 3-page text with a lot of astrological symbols, known to be as one of the very first books of the Kabbalah, right?
Well, from a historic standpoint, the Sefer Yetzirah may be pre-Kabbalah, or very, very, very early. Because the Sefer Yetzirah basically only introduces the idea of the Sefirot vaguely, and only 1/6 of the book deals with the Sefirot. The concept of the Tree of Life seems to have emerged sometime after the Sefer Yetzirah was written, because there's no concept of the tree. It's more talked about vaguely as the Sefirot, and you do get the picture, though it's not exactly stated, that the structure of the Sefirot in terms of the Sefer Yetzirah has to do with like concentric circles, or as a linear progression of Sefirot or developments, but there's no real structure talked about.
Are Sefirot, in a way, the opposite of black holes?
That's a hard one to question, but on a symbolic level, yeah, the Sefirot are stages of the process of creation, emerging and evolving. So what happens in a black hole. Actually, in part we know, in part we have no idea. That everything is sucked into a black hole, it infinitely or to a great condenses, and then something happens, but we're not sure.
In this case, it's the opposite.
Well, so like I said, from a symbolic or conceptual standpoint.
Now, the correct way of saying is a tohu vavohu, or
tohu vavohu.
Is that in a way the very spark of a Sefirot's inception?
No, because in the Sefirot start out from God's intention and then gradually emerge or emanate one after the other from the intention. In the biblical story, we're talking about God already being, already having, how do I put it? It's like Genesis doesn't start at the beginning of the process. It starts at the beginning of the process that God used to create the universe as we understand it. But it already describes that God had already formed a void. God had already formed depth. God had already created darkness. So there's all these things that God had already created that were going to be used in the process of creation as we understand it.
So the space of tohu
yeah,
would be known as?
Well, the closest thing I could say is chaos. That before there's order, there's chaos.
But it's a kind of chaos. For example, it's not the kind of chaos we see on the news when there's some kind of...
No. This is scientific. This is the scientific definition of chaos.
It's almost parallel to the Big Bang itself. They seem
perhaps
very similar.
There are similarities, but I'm cautious about making an identity between the two.
Now, okay, so let's go back to the 72 names and demons. In many religions and spiritual beliefs, people who are enlightened or reach a certain level of wisdom or spirituality or connection to the unconscious, a lot of times there's a certain kind of light that surrounds them, and demons and dark forces and jealousy and negativity seems to it's like moth to a flame. They're really attracted to that. In the Jewish Kabbalistic perspective, what is that called, and how does one protect themselves from such vampirism?
Okay, well, this is going to take a while because the Jewish conception is somewhat different. The Jewish conception does talk about demons, and it can talk. Judaism never accepted the idea of hell. What they refer to is Gehinnom, which is often translated as hell, actually is technically more purgatory. And the concept of demons is not always negative. There's a very strong concept in the Kabbalah that there are two kinds of angels. That the term Satan, which is translated, Satan, generally refers to a category of angels. And the word Satan comes from the Hebrew verb to mean to accuse. So there are two different types of angels in Jewish thinking. One is that angels that are there to support a soul in its development, and also to defend the soul when it passes over to the other side and is judged. And then that's one half of the group. The other group is the accusing angels. Their objective is to, every time a soul does something wrong, and then cumulatively, when the soul comes to be judged after they die, they're the prosecuting attorneys, so to speak. They're coming up with, well, this is what he did wrong. This is what he did wrong. All the accusations. So the concept, even in Jewish folklore of demons, is often that the demons have a constructive function. That they're not always trying to destroy things. They've been sent by God, or along with accusing angels, to make things difficult for a person, in order for the person to understand the mistake that they're making, so that they have time to repent and correct it.
And in terms of those demons running after the light, or whatever is shining bright, what's a way to protect oneself from, let's say, the negative aspects of those demons?
Okay. Basically, we're talking about moving toward how do I put this? The more light a person moves to, the more spiritual their grounding is, the more light that they're receiving, or they're willing to receive, the harder it is for the negative forces to get close to them. Because light counteracts dark. So the demons are negative forces, because negative forces can be more than demons. I've done periodic work which I never anticipated doing. That these people ended up showing up at my doorstep for help that were possessed. And I figured, well, okay, if God's sending them to my doorstep, I'm going to have to find a way to deal with this. Turns out it wasn't. It took me a while to learn how to deal with this. But one of the things I found in dealing with people that are being possessed, they're not being necessarily tormented by devils or demons. They're being tormented by souls, human soul, that are very big lowlifes, that are afraid to cross over to the other side because they know what's waiting for them when they face the high court, so that they latch on to vulnerable individuals to try and stay on this level as long as they can before they have to face the music.
And by facing the music, they have to go to purgatory, you mean?
Yeah.
What is purgatory like?
That's complex, but I can tell you in a nutshell what my experience has been. Because I had a couple of meditative experiences over the years where angels would show up and say, well, we're taking you on a tour of hell. So, you
mean purgatory?
Purgatory, I'm sorry. So, one of the things I noticed was that, because when the first time when the angels were taking me to purgatory, we were like flying above it. And what I noticed was like a huge expanse. So this wasn't a territory, this was a huge territory. And that that purgatory was like divided up into all these like rooms. It was
like a labyrinth?
Like a labyrinth, except with rooms. And what was going on in each room was a different aspect of purgatory. And I thought it was really interesting that none of the people in the rooms that they were in had any idea there were any other rooms. So they were like self-contained. But one or two of them that I remember the most clearly was how do I put it? Well, I'll give you 2 or 3 examples. One of which, the first room that struck my attention, was a room that was sort of dark. It was like a dark room with windows at the top, and the light was coming in, but it illuminated the room so you could see, but not much more than that. It was very, very dark in the room. But what I was seeing was a number of people in a circle, all wearing cloaks and a hood. And they were marching around in a circle, and they were all looking down at the ground, and it was like a perpetual motion. So I asked one of the angels, well, what is this? What is this place? And his response was, this is where souls go who've committed suicide. Mm. And he said, he said, what do you notice about this? I said, first of all, they're walking around in a circle, which means they're not actually going anywhere. So the angel nodded. He said, what else do you see? I said, I see they're looking down at the ground. I said, I'm not sure what that means. He says, it means that they were so absorbed in themselves and their own sorrow and their own narratives that they're stuck in the story. And I said, the other thing I noticed was that even though they're walking around as a group in a circle, none of the people walking around is aware of any of the other people in the room. And he said that that's the self-absorption element. And yeah.
And it's so interesting, that totally reminds me of being in first, second grade in Russia during recesses. That's what we did. We walked in a circle, looking down for 15 minutes. So I experienced this in person.
Welcome to purgatory.
Yeah, exactly. What actually happened to them? Do you any feelings about what happened to them later on, or?
Well, what eventually happens is you're in purgatory until you figure it out. Mm-hmm. In other words, if a person finally realizes what they've done and the extent of what they've done and the ramifications of what they've done, and feel a sense of regret or remorse, that's the key out of purgatory.
Wow. That's the way it is here on Earth too.
Yeah.
Except in purgatory, here on Earth, it deals with your unconscious and conscious mind connecting in a way and making that spark. How do you prove that in purgatory, in the other realm? Who do you show that to? How do you say I'm ready to get out of the circle?
I don't know. I think it's the cognition.
The cognition allows you freedom?
Yeah, because it's going to change your behavior. It's going to change your viewpoint.
That's an exquisitely remarkable, dark image, moving image that you've you've imparted onto the audience and into me, because I can completely see. Not only have I experienced it in real life, but it's really something. I mean, I can see a whole movie out of this or a whole book out of this.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something you should write about. I don't know if there's been a lot of what happens after suicide books. So, and of course, anybody thinking of such a thing, please call 911 or go to call 911 if you're thinking of that. But at the same time, we're having a philosophical conversation. So, now, or any other emergency phone number in your country. I don't know what emergency numbers are in every country, but in the U.S. so far is 911 as of this recording. Nonetheless, let's move forward to, that was really, we went pretty deep there. I'm taking a moment just to come back. Okay. To bring something to a lighter note, Rabbi Fisdel and I, we have 3 similarities I always notice. We always wear hats. We always wear Adidas, which is German, interestingly, and we always wear some kind of a talismanic stone. Mm-hmm. So that's just natural between us. Now, tell me about hats. Like a lot of Jewish people wear kippahs.
Yeah.
I recently got a really fantastic one from Israel. But tell me, now you wear straw hats. I wear caps. Mm-hmm. First of all, what makes hats holy? Second of all, does it matter what kind of hat? And third of all, in many gatherings, when you go to have dinner or meet people, it's always considered rude to wear a hat.
Right.
I never feel that way. I always disagree.
Right.
I feel it's completely not rude. We're in different places there.
Right.
So tell us about those things.
Okay. Well, I'll start with question 3 and work backward.
Okay.
In terms of wearing a hat at a social gathering or things like that, that's just Western cultural practice. That in Western culture for centuries, the concept was being respectful. You took off your hat. Like what used to be the case, although people don't do it anymore, is when you were walking down the street to acknowledge someone you knew, you doffed your hat. It was considered impolite. It was considered important, wearing a hat outdoors, because there are practical considerations for that. But to wear something that's meant for outdoors indoors was considered impolite. But that's just that's just Western culture. In Jewish culture, the idea has always been the opposite, because it developed in the Near East. And in Near Eastern thought, it's the opposite, that covering your head is a sign of respect. Mm-hmm. So for a very long time, for much of Jewish history, the men wore hats all the time.
Including inside the house, at dinner.
Right, because, covering your head meant showing a sign of respect. So the concept was you need to show respect not only for other people, but also for God. So God is anywhere you go. It doesn't make any difference whether it's inside or outside. So the wearing of the hat on a constant basis, it was a sign of general respect and also reverence toward God,
which is a higher respect than to a human.
Yes.
And you also do the same thing that I do, which is wear hats anywhere you want, inside out.
Well, unless it's I am sensitive to sometimes to cultural norms. So if I'm in an auditorium, where they expect you not to wear a hat, mm-hmm. I don't wear a hat in a theater, like in a movie, either, because it makes it hard for somebody behind me to see mm-hmm. if I'm wearing a hat.
Unless you're on a steeped.
Yeah, unless I'm in the back row, mm-hmm. or I'm in the front row in the balcony, then it's a different story. But it's to me, it's I wear a hat a lot because there's a general sign of respect.
That's amazing. I feel very comfortable wearing hats, even when nobody else does. And it's pretty interesting. Now, does it matter what kind of hat? Cap, straw?
No,
kippah?
no, it doesn't. The idea is that the head is covered because the top of the head is considered sacred. This is the in how do I put it? In mystic traditions and in psychic traditions, things like that, both the whole idea is that the crown of the head is the that and the third eye are the two spiritual centers of the body.
Now, the third eye, what's behind the place where the third eye is? I mean, what's really there?
Well, the pituitary gland. And what's below the crown of the head is the pineal gland.
And what do those glands do?
Well, the pineal gland, I don't understand it from a scientific vantage point, but from the pineal gland has a lot to do with the movement of consciousness.
Interesting.
Yeah. The pituitary gland, I forget I know the pituitary gland regulates a lot of the other organs.
Okay. Now, we talked about magic in the Kabbalah. We talked about, black magic and so many other things being highly, banned. However, to make it clear, magic for the well-being of oneself or others, healing magic, is indeed approved, correct?
Yeah, but you have to be careful with it. How do I put it? Again, the reference is that you can use Kabbalist principles for healing purposes, but basically what you're doing in that case is you're basically, in a sense, connecting with divine energy in order to allow the healing to happen. So the concept is God is doing the healing, I'm not doing anything except facilitating the transmission of the energy.
And, okay, now let's talk about a couple of other subjects. We have about 14 minutes to go.
Okay.
There's some people in some religions who call Moses a killer in the Bible. Him and David, that they had blood on their hands, that they committed murder. Now, these being some of the very top holy men in the Old Testament, how does one explain, how does one clear their name or clarify what they've done?
Well, because first of all, most of the I'll use King David as an example. Most of the fighting King David did was defensive, and the same thing was true of King Saul, Samuel before him, that sort of thing. That that it's usually how do I put it? It's usually in response to an attack or a threat of an attack.
What about Moses?
Moses didn't kill anybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
There must be misinformation.
There was a major battle or two that took place in the desert. But then again, that was also very defensive, and much of the practical fighting was led by Joshua. That's when the Amalekites attacked Israel at a point of weakness in the desert, and we're trying to kill off all the women and children so that the Israelites go extinct, and Joshua and the Israelites had to beat the Amalekites back, and then God says eventually, that because of what the Amalekites did, that God says that I will exterminate the Amalekites eventually.
Now, let's go to the Ten Commandments, which was given to Moses by God, right?
Yeah.
Now, is there a possibility, or that the Ten Commandments were, let's say, written by Moses, or maybe a group of people in charge that sat around and came up with the most important strategies for life, and by saying that it came from God in a way it did through their consciousness as humans, that these are the basic principles of behavior, but that it didn't necessarily physically come from another realm?
Well, I'll tell you what the Bible says, and I'll tell you how I understand it personally. That God made a very big point of getting the Israelites out of Egypt, specifically for the purpose of bringing them to Mount Sinai and giving them the
tablets.
Not just the tablets, the whole Torah was given in Mount Sinai. And that Moses had to go. That originally God came down to the entire people to when he announced the Ten Commandments. The people, however, got freaked out and ran back and said to Moses, "We can't deal with this. That if God wants to give us the commandments, that's fine, but you're going to have to go up and intercede for us. We can't deal with this. That because this is a little too much for them. That the mountain was shaking, the sky was dark, the top of the mountain was smoking. It was, they couldn't handle this. So Moses says, I don't know if I can do that or not. Let me check with God. God says, okay, we can do it that way. So Moses goes up the mountain, and then God comes, Spirit of God comes down, and they meet at the top of the mountain. And it took 40 days for the transmission of the information. Now, whether God actually spoke like I'm speaking to you to Moses, and Moses is transcribing them, is a possibility, but it's not, in my mind, the strongest likelihood. More likely is that it was coming to Moses via some sort of sound, and that because what happens with the Ark of the Covenant when Moses talks to God from the Ark of the Covenant is not that God's words come out, but sort of like a vibration or a sound or a series of sounds emanate from over the top of the ark, and then Moses is able to sort of meditate on the internalize the sound, and then he comes out and this is what God said. Boom, 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 boom. It's like he's the translator of whatever information is coming via sound wave, and he's interpreting it and vocalizing it in language.
In a way, that's very subjective, and one has to have a very pure heart in order to do a proper translation.
Well, one of the things that it says about Moses in the Bible is he was the most humble person that ever lived, either before him or since.
Now, was Moses considered the Holy of the Holies?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, when we talk about the pulpit and hearing translating these sounds from to clarify to the audience, now we're talking about specifically the ark, the pulpit. Yeah. Yes. Right.
The ark of the Covenant was a I call it a device, but it was designed. God gave the design to a man by the name of Bezalel, who was a master craftsman, when they were in the desert, and had him build the ark. And the specific function of the ark was inside the ark. They placed the commandments, the written the stuff that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai. God said to include a jar of manna from the desert, and also the staff of Aaron, which they had been used to when God wanted to create a miracle to get people their attention. That was sealed inside the Ark of the Covenant, but the function of the Ark of the Covenant was for Moses or Aaron to come before God in the tent of meeting, in the Holy of Holies, and stand before the Ark, and God would transmit information or commandments. That's how Moses talked to God all those years.
First of all, where was this located, and what was the Holy of the Holies?
Well, God had them create sort of like a portable temple when they were going through the desert, which consisted of a large screened area, and then within that area was divided basically two sections. One section was where they set up the altar and did the sacrifices, and then there was a giant curtain that separated that from the other section, which had the menorah and the incense altar and the table for the bread, and then there was a major curtain that separated that from the ark. So there was like three inside the Mishkan, which was the tabernacle that they carted around through the desert. There were three major sections.
So this was like wheeled around on a cart?
No, it was established on the ground, and then when they had to move, they disassembled it, and there were certain priests that carried different parts. Wherever they settled next, they set it back up.
Now, first of all, sacrifices, were those like goats, or what kind of sacrifices?
Sacrifices could involve either cattle, cows, bulls, sheep, doves, goats.
And were those sacrifices later eaten, or what would happen? Or
Some of them. It depends on what kind of sacrifice it was. Certain sacrifices, the burnt offerings, were completely incinerated. Those went directly to God. Other types of sacrifices were burned on the altar, and some of the animal was completely incinerated. The rest of it was taken off and eaten by the priests.
Was this, in a way, the fact that we have so many butcher houses that make, our burgers and fried chicken and all this stuff, in a form, isn't that all sacrifices too?
No, because they're not dedicated to God.
Okay. Now, back to this incredible moving ark. Now, again, what is the meaning of Holy of the Holies? What exactly is that? Is that the part of the ark?
No, it's part of the sanctuary that held the ark.
What exactly is a Holy of the Holies? Is that the cherubs?
No, the Holy of Holies is a section of the. It was a section of the tabernacle, and it was a section of the temple. It was a place. It was a place name. That Holy of Holies meant this was the place designated in the tabernacle and the temple for where the Holy of Holies was stationed.
Holy of Holies was stationed is what exactly?
I'm sorry. That the Holy of Holies is where the ark was stationed. Sorry.
Okay. So the Holy of the Holies is where the particular communication took place.
Right.
So where the cherubs stood, and when the priest at that time, was able to extract the messages, that particular location was the Holy of the Holies.
Right.
In a way, exactly the same thing as in Delphi was the oracle with the whatever ball and the bagasse coming. That particular area.
Yeah.
So in that area, as you discussed, it was made from acacia wood and gold, right?
Yeah.
Made in such a way that there was such an electrical charge. So this is everything that you've said previous in the class, which was fantastic. What a story! What an image! The two cherubs barely touching would create such a powerful electrical charge, which was later reproduced recently and kind of burst open windows and things.
Yeah.
That there was such a specific audio, like you mentioned, audio made that the priest in charge, which were changing, right? There were several different priests.
Well, the only priest that could enter the Holy of Holies was the high priest.
Was that always a Kohanim?
Well, yeah, the whole Kohanim. No, yes and no. I mean, there's the Kohanim, which are the descendants of Aaron, the priests. But the priests were divided into families, sort of like clans. Mm-hmm. And one of the clans was a high priestly clan.
Which is the Kohanim or somebody else?
No, they were Kohanim, but they were a division within the Kohanim.
That were the priests.
Yeah, the Kohanim were the priests, but the Kohanim, the priests, were divided into 13 different families, mm-hmm. or sort of like tribes, mm-hmm. Or clans would be a good word for it. One of the clans was the high priestly one.
Okay. And currently, that particular high priestly clan still exists under the last name Kohanim, right?
We don't know.
So, for example, I always say Leonard Cohen, who recently passed, was very much an art priest.
Right.
He did what the Kohanim did back in the days through art, through media.
Right.
Now, as we conclude this incredible interview, also part of the ark was the breastplate.
No. The breastplate was part of the garments worn by the high priest
in the Holy of the Holies.
Yeah, but he could wear it elsewhere as well, apparently.
And this incredible piece of metal and stones was filled with both precious and semi-precious stones.
Yes.
Each of them that were activated in order to receive additional messages.
Yes.
Is there any way to know how they were activated?
Well, we do know that when the breastplate was used for additional divine communication, that the breastplate was set down, and they would put behind the breastplate something that they refer to as the Urim V'Tumim, but we have no idea what that was. But it was some sort of device that was placed behind the breastplate, which would when a question or when was asked or a divine transmission came through, it would create a series of lights within the stones.
Is that so? The lights would create a code.
That's quite conceivable.
So different, like let's say sapphire, ruby, emerald would mean one word, whereas ruby, sapphire, emerald would be a different word?
Or a different concept.
But we don't know exactly what.
We don't know what.
Now, as we finalize the interview, sometimes when people pray in the Jewish religion, they use tefillin, the wooden box, right?
Right.
What does that really do? What is the meaning of that?
Well, the tefillin were the structure of the tefillin were based on the Holy of Holies, mm-hmm. because they're cubes, mm-hmm. and they're on a square platform, which conforms to what the Holy of Holies was, the inner court of the temple, the Holy and the Holy of Holies, was within that same cube, but it was a cubic room that was raised on a platform. So the tefillin, there's two of them. One goes on the arm near the heart, and one goes on the forehead. So it's meant to connect heart energy, which is psycho-emotional, with higher consciousness. So when you're using the tefillin, you're drawing down energy from two different directions, from the higher level and from deep within yourself, and it's meant to heighten consciousness and to also to deepen reverence and experience while praying. And they're only used during the weekdays, not on Shabbat, because Shabbat has such intense energy, you don't need to augment it.
In a way, it creates kavanah by wearing it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
I don't know. I can respond to questions. It would take me longer to come up with a subject.
Well, we've been speaking with the very wise and profound Rabbi Fisdel. And You can find out his 2 books on Amazon. One book is about the Kabbalah, one book is about Dead Sea Scrolls. His websites again are classicalkabbalist.org and mysticaljudaism.org. He also offers spiritual counseling. Rabbi, it's been a true pleasure having you on the show.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.